It's lovely to be back in this beautiful city, San Diego, my favorite city in the whole of US. Not kidding. My name is PD Prasad. I'm one of the co-founders of Lightbeam. And before we get started, I would like to introduce Eric and Tyler from Lightbeam, and they're actually going to do a couple of minutes of company presentation, what we do. After that, I'll take over. So Eric, all yours.
Thank you, PD. Hey everybody, so my name is Eric Scheffley. So I'm actually just the sales guy here at Lightbeam, but I am the local account executive. So I cover the San Diego area. I live in Las Vegas personally. And my background is in the data space, moving into security. So kind of understanding as an organization, all the stuff you want to do that's super exciting, the responsibility that comes along with that. And Lightbeam got me very excited about this, one, because of kind of the early success they had, but some of the stuff we'll get in early on as we introduce the solution, which is kind of the ability to add more context and make some of this actionable instead of just living on a dashboard and living on alerts. So just high level of the organization. So we are a startup, VC backed, some very good names there. Very important to us as we set out our SOC 2 Type 2 compliance early on. I know it's a lot important to a lot of organizations. And we are located somewhat locally in just the Palo Alto Bay Area. So to get a little bit more into the solution and what we do, I'll hand it over to Tyler to introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Tyler Rowe. I am the solution architect or engineer, whatever you want to call us nowadays, supporting this region. I'm actually out of the Dallas area, but been on here many times. And I've been focused, if you will, on DLP kind of solutions, if you will, for the last 10 years. Before that, I was even doing backup stuff. Like I've had lots of different jobs just in IT, if you can't tell by my beard and my further lack of hair. So we're going through it. So DSPM, I've been actually working with this for some time, and I really thought this was super cool because it was doing things that we weren't doing historically just with the inline DLP stuff, where we're actually looking at the structured content where all that information is. So, of course, we need to be able to find all of that information, and we need to be able to take those traditional actions with that. But then also there's that whole privacy conversation that is always kind of left off in the dust and just exists somewhere way over there, right? So that's something else that I found that was personally attracted to me, was being able to actually have that privacy conversation, being able to find all of that data and then being able to take actions associated with it. So for example, for me personally, I just went on Disney cruise and I had to surrender a lot of information for them, including my passport number. And if you guys aren't aware, they actually had a Slack breach, I think 2 years ago or something like that, where all of that information was lost. So going to be promptly firing an email off that way. Right. And so then also from a governance perspective, we can handle a lot of those different things when it comes to, say, the life cycle and or labeling. A lot of different areas of where we can play and be beneficial, and not just a kind of what I would like to say is a one-trick pony. So with that, I'll turn it over to PD.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric and Tyler. Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the presentation. All right. Perfect. So, hi, folks online. Hopefully you can hear us. Hopefully you can see us as well. So we're going to go and start with a quiz. It's a very easy quiz. Where does data live? And everyone has to answer something that someone else has not answered before. I'll start myself. First of all, let me get mine out of the way. Data lives in emails.
Data lives in your neurons and the way that they're constructed.
Yeah. Neurons, yeah. Go ahead. Anyone is welcome, by the way. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Data lives in containers.
Containers, okay. Yeah.
Mobile devices.
Mobile devices, okay.
Data lives in the cloud.
And cloud, okay. That was the big one. Now you have covered cloud, means, you know, anyone else probably doesn't have to answer anything else because cloud is like so much. Yeah, you're going to say cloud, right? That was a big one. Please. On your disk, that's right. Endpoints, yeah, that's right. Ryan? You got nothing. See, you stole everyone's thunder. So anything else? Yeah?
In your search history and Microsoft's recall.
Recall, that's right. Search history, browsers, ChatGPT. Come again, sir? That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Video, audio as well, you know. That's right. Okay. This is the end all be all of everything. Okay. So, yeah, and I think that's the problem, right? Because, and we haven't even talked about the usual stuff like data lives in your enterprises, in databases, in data warehouses, data lakes, in your file repositories, in your ticketing systems, if you use like ServiceNow or whatever it is, Slack, Teams, Jira, by the way, right? So data lives everywhere, unfortunately. And, I was talking to Farah just before this, and she was like, yeah, this is a problem because now AI has come to the fore. And with the advent of AI, the issue is, in some sense, so I've been doing this for about 25 years now. That's why my hair is all white. Up until AI, in some sense, we could kind of ignore data, kinda. Because like, yeah, it's okay, it's there, no one has access to it, it's okay. The problem with AI is that you can't ignore it because AI could actually go and access it and then make that data available to someone you probably didn't want that data to become available to, essentially, right? We have seen examples where chief revenue officer's W-2 statement was present on SharePoint, which was accessible to everyone in the company. Now, it was accessible. That doesn't mean that everyone was accessing it. But with AI, now all you need to do is one prompt, and now that data becomes available to everyone, which is really bad. This is where, as we were thinking about, how do we kind of address this? Let's start with the problem statement. And in our mind, the problem statement is shadow data. Shadow data, i.e. data that exists, but we don't know about it, essentially. So that's the topic of the presentation, taming shadow data with DSPM, which stands for Data Security Posture Management. There's lots and lots of acronyms. Actually, I was, thanks to ISACA, I was given this pen, and Odette there reminded me that this pen has 6 things. You can actually do 6 things with this pen, which is amazing, because this is like a lot like security tooling these days. I mean, every organization that has security tooling has probably, I don't know, maybe 30 tools that you're using these days for X, Y, and Z purposes, much like this pen, essentially. So DSPM, CSPM, CWPP, we come up with these acronyms, or Gartner does really, to confuse all of us and to kind of keep up with certifications and stuff like that. But taming shadow data with DSPM, and we call it from chaos to control. So chaos because data lives everywhere, and how do we really control it? And it is incumbent upon us, the security professionals, much like, 20 years back, 25 years back, it was incumbent upon us to ensure that we have right firewalls and boundaries. Now it has become incumbent upon us to understand where does our data live so that we have the proper guardrails, essentially, yeah? So most of the breaches, well, 35%, 1/3 essentially, they involve some sort of shadow data, right? Which is kind of interesting, which basically means that if your breach risk is whatever, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, you can actually cut that breach risk to 1/3 if you actually manage your shadow data properly, which is good. I mean, how many things can you do that actually cut down your risk by 1/3? There are not that many. This is one of those. So this is good to kind of pay attention to, essentially. All right, let's see if we can make this work. No. All right. Let's see. All right. So that's the agenda. I hope this starts working. We'll understand a little bit about shadow data. I think we've already started that understanding a little bit. Where does data live? Everywhere, unfortunately. We'll look into some DSPM core capabilities. This was the reason why we got Lightbeam introduction out of the way, so that none of this has anything to do with Lightbeam. It will be just very, very generic. And then we'll talk about some best practices based, of course, on our experience, our customers' experience, people who we talk to, and so on and so forth, right? So that's the topic of the day. And we'll keep asking some questions in the middle. This, unfortunately, for some reason, no longer cooperates with me. Yeah, no, let me see.
That guy works.
This guy. All right.
So real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So I should be there. Yep. I just want to make sure that this works. Okay. So here is a kind of a quick survey of the audience over here. How many of you have data security, not network security, but really data security as part of your job descriptions, roughly speaking? So that I count about 5 to 6 in a group of probably 30. How many of you have network security in part of your job description? About same 5 to 6, let's say. Security operations. All right, getting hotter. So I have covered about, deduplicating stuff about 15 of you. What are the other 15 of you doing? Because there's network security, which is big firewalls, make sure that nothing is coming, firewall and stuff like that. There's data security. Everyone is after your data at the end of the day, right? And then there is security operations, essentially. So are there people with incident management over here? Are there people like, what's some of the
Product security, security architecture.
security and security architecture? That's right. So that's on the architecture side. Okay, great. Now, for those of you who have been looking at data security for some time, if I may ask a question, what do you consider as part of data security? I'll start again. DLP, part of data loss prevention, literally it's in the name. So that's part of data security. What other things do you consider part of DSPM or data security? Go ahead, please.
Classifying data. Maybe.
Data classification, yeah, absolutely. Access management, yeah. If you speak, I can speak this in the mic for everyone else. Yeah, access management. So who has access to data? Yeah, makes sense. Policy management. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, sir? That's right. So that's right. So I would put that under data governance, essentially. Yeah, makes sense. That's right. Yes. So you have summarized it very well, and thank you for stealing my thunder, Farah. That was great. Right? But yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, but that's very, very hard, isn't it? I mean, I'm just gonna tee up on that. It's a great point. From
Test. Oh, now
there you go.
So you at least need to be in the 70 to 80 percentile mark.
That's
But
right.
with insider risk, just if you can knock away 70% of bad actions based off of that, that's actually useful.
Yeah, the 70% to 80%, roughly speaking, is actually a theme for data security all over across the industry. So I'll take an example. Data classification. If you can get 80% of your data classified, you have already won the battle. If you have proper access controls, someone said access control on 70 to 80% of the data, you have won the battle, essentially, right? So what we see here is, unlike firewalls, unlike network security, where you actually need to be 100% accurate because you don't want to get anyone that is scrupulous come inside your network. Even one bad behavior, bad actor can actually cause havoc. The good news, and this is a very different way of kind of presenting. I'm not trying to make a big deal of something. I'm trying to actually reduce the big deal over here, because we also have to live. We also have to make a practical solution rather than just creating a massive theoretical issue and then saying there is no solution to that. The good news here, and I'll come to you, sir. The good news here is, if you can actually get 80% governance, double quotes, on data, you're actually making a huge difference for your organization, right? So that's a good, I would say, thing to take home in some sense is, okay, I gotta just get to that 80%. Just get to that 80% and I will be good, right? And after that, it becomes harder and harder and harder. You're gonna say something?
And the way to get to that is to abstract and encapsulate the data and also compartmentalize it so that people only have access to the things that they're specifically given access to, and they don't have the ability to even accidentally do other things.
True, true. I would surmise there, though, that while that is very, very true, probably the first step on that is actually do the classification and labeling if properly. Because if you can do the classification, and again, this is based on some time that I've been looking at it and talking to people like yourself, by the way, a lot of organizations, and I think I might have a slide on that, we'll see, the journey of how you get to a good DSPM implementation within your company. One of the first things that we see is get classification done. And when I say classification, I mean it a little broadly. So classification, call it data labeling. Once you have that, then you can start putting into, okay, well, if it is financial data, that's already getting containerized. So it needs to be in finance container, let's say. And then who needs to have access to that data, essentially? So that's the 3-step, 4-step journey, essentially. Does that make sense? Go ahead, please. Yes. You can do the classification. And then after that, access governance on that. Yeah, fair enough. I put discovery and classification together, but absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the simplest way to classify a lot of the data out is to just split it between human generated and machine generated. If there's reports, sensor data, those types of things, you can automatically and procedurally manage all of that and then just gatekeep the requests to that information.
That's right. Yeah.
Cuts the footprint.
That's right. Yeah. Very well said. Very well said. So the topic that I had over here was ungovernable. And I'm just trying to, instead of like just saying theoretically, it's such a big problem, it can't be governed. The idea that I wanted to just drive home for all of us here is think of that 80%, right? That 80%, if you're getting to that 80% layer, you folks would be already way ahead of your peers in the industry if you're just at 80%. Go ahead.
Valuable. Are you talking about data that's governed by regulatory compliance needs or data that might be used like in an AI model? Because that's two totally different things.
Yeah, and I haven't actually come to that level of detail or granularity yet, but actually there is regulatory data, there is AI data, but there's also just company, enterprise data. You create a ticket that goes to an IT team, that's data as well, and that ticket might actually have sensitive information in there. Just as simple as that. Your email may have sensitive information that actually is going outside of your company. So it doesn't need to be just one or the other. There's like just so many types of data. We'll see different types of data essentially. Go ahead.
And does your 80%, is that for data across the board? Because I would think there's some very what's the word, strategic data that 80% is just not good enough.
Like IP data, by the way, your patents. Right. If you're a company whose business is to create patents, even one patent before it gets filed, if it gets exposed, it's a huge problem. Earnings statement is one of my favorite examples. Earnings statements, if you're a public company, are supposed to be public, but only after the earnings date. Before the earnings announcement, your earnings statements are super confidential. You actually can be sued by SEC if someone were to get access to that and then start making trades on that, right? So the 80%, of course, no number is going to be a be all and all of anything. But the idea is we're talking about, the moment we talk about the specifics like patents and IP and earnings statement, that's like 1% of your data. Within your own company, this type of data is just 1%. You have got so much more data, essentially, right? So the averaging of that, while you... Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Hopefully better, right? So the point is, there is data, and this is where the classification comes into picture, essentially, right? The moment you can make better decisions for protecting data based on what type of data it is. Again, coming back to the classification question, essentially, over there. So that was all I wanted to speak on this slide. Not ungovernable. Regardless of what the slide says, it is actually not supposed to be ungovernable. We can actually take care of this essentially. If we were to keep our goals around, roughly about 80%. Go ahead, sir.
So one thing that I've found in my career is that you're aiming at classification and discovery, but in reality, you're going to have a huge amount of data you will never find. I mean, to be blunt, I have been in companies at least 3 times that lost a data center, like literally a data center with hundreds of thousands of servers. The amount of data that people aren't going to find is almost unimaginable. I mean, we can aim for it. Data on access or use, that's one area to do additional discovery, but we always have to keep that in mind.
Hence the topic of this talk, shadow data. Hence, there is some good news though on that front. So I started looking into, this is me personally, started looking into data security about 9 to 10 years back. And it was incredibly difficult just to figure out where all the data is. I used to work for a company that's a public company now, and we would have data. We were just going through the room here everywhere essentially, and we were an engineering-led company, so we would have data in Jira and Confluence and stuff like that, and G Drive and all that. And it was incredibly hard, incredibly difficult, almost impossible, I would say, at that point in time. The good news, though, is in the last 5 years, I would say probably 4 to 5 years, there are techniques that are available now that can actually do a really good job at solving large-scale data discovery and classification problems. This wasn't the case 5 years back. It wasn't. So there is good news, essentially, on that. And hence this acronym, hence this category of DSPM, because otherwise it wouldn't even exist, essentially, right? So, all right. Of course, you can't secure what you can't see. If only this would cooperate with me. There you go. For some reason, come on. Too much. I'm just gonna do this. All right. So, again, my job here, my goal here is really to simplify. That is literally my goal. So I started with 80%, you do not need 100% because then you will never start. Take the first step, aim 80%, you will get somewhere. Second simplification, all data that you have, no matter what type it is, no matter where it is, you can actually classify that under 3 types, broadly speaking: structured, semi-structured, unstructured. Which one do you think is the easiest to manage? Structured. Everyone in the audience is amazing, right? And that's also because, structured data has a lot of business value, not that unstructured doesn't, but structured data literally runs your company, essentially, your companies. So we've had a lot of investments, essentially. We give permissions to people based on some business logic, business reasons, essentially. So structured is, easiest to manage.
Is the one which has got the metadata. I mean, that's one of the biggest. I consult for a biotech company, and most of the data, as you said, is private, and it's kind of controlled by the patients or the customers or whoever it is, including the IP data, which is kind of comes under both structure. It kind of varies. If you just put a heat map, it varies. But yeah, so in my experience, if you have a good metadata or somebody who knows about that data, that's easy to manage.
Fair enough. Broadly speaking, though, structured data has a lot of good metadata, broadly speaking, but that doesn't say anything against the point that you are making, of course. Now, here's a different question. Which data is the easiest to forget about? We're all security professionals here. I heard unstructured. It's actually the semi-structured data that is easiest to forget about. The unstructured data is actually not easy to forget about because we all have at the back of our heads that, oh my God, there's a lot of data in SharePoint and OneDrive and Slack and G Drive and Teams and emails. And so we have some sense that, while I can't I can't have that level of control on unstructured data that I have for structured data, let's just say, but we can put some broad level of controls. Like, for example, if you're using SharePoint, your control is your AD. You give permissions on SharePoint using AD. So there's a bit of control over there at a higher level. It's not as granular, I grant you that, but you have it at the back of your head. Semi-structured, on the other hand. So what's semi-structured data? Some examples? Guesses? That's access control, but what's... Oh, Access DB, MS Access, you mean? Fair. Fair, fair. You hit the nail on the head, absolutely. Other examples? Anyone use ServiceNow here? Any ticketing system? Any ticketing system at all? Anyone use CRM here? HubSpot, Salesforce? I mean, these are all semi-structured data. Go ahead. Oh, so under, and we can have a half-an-hour discussion on this, but under my definition, essentially, anything that is rows and columnar is structured. That's easy to understand, right? Put under databases and stuff like that. Anything that is broadly files, just files, documents, and stuff like that, I put that under unstructured, right? And then anything that has a mix of both, essentially, I put that under semi-structured. CSV could be, it's very interesting, because CSV has rows and columns as well. So you could actually technically put that under structure, but it's a file format, so it could be considered as a semi-structure. But the other issue with CSVs is that there is no rule that you can not put unstructured data in a CSV. You can very well put, you can create a template out of a CSV, which then makes it semi-structured essentially. But you are making a point, looks like.
From my perception, everything that is a file can be structured, because if nothing else, you have a file, an access time, file size. So all those are metrics that can and really should be monitored for anything that needs to be secure.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, sorry. Yeah, it's kind of linked to that. If you have a metadata, I think that the gentleman there was making a point. I'll give you a slightly different perspective on that. And then there's an operational perspective on that. From a computer science perspective, I'm thinking from a technology perspective a little bit. If you throw database at me, I go, oh, this is easy. You might have a database that might have 10 million rows. I don't need to go through 10 million rows to figure out what kind of data do you have there. So remember data classification we were talking about? That's one of the discovery and classification, one of the first things. To handle structured data is extremely easy, actually, from that standpoint. From that standpoint. The moment you throw a file at me, now what does that file have? Every row, every line, every word could be sensitive, may not be sensitive. So I can't make a judgment based on. So it's extremely, like, there's literally no inference I can draw unless I can actually go through that file, essentially. So it's like complete la-la land, hence unstructured, essentially. You're making a point, looks like, and I'll come to you, sir.
So where will you classify Zoom recording, team chats, all that it doesn't have any structure, although maybe you can protect access to Zoom?
Yeah, team chats and all are unstructured because they're just like a file. Just like a file, right? So it's the point over there, and again, this is not necessarily something that, that is most important. Where I'm driving to is there are different techniques that you can use to actually control and manage these kind of data types. But you were making a point. You go to that. Okay, got it. Go ahead.
So there is one extra problem with unstructured. Oh, there's right in front of me. Yeah, I'm doing good.
You only get one.
Jeez, only one. But unstructured brings in the large problem of file size as well. Even most DLP tools, they only take a tiny segment of a file for checking against DLP. If I'm sending a Word document and that Word document is 350 pages long, DLP is not going to look through the entire document.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's where 5 years post versus now, there is some advantages, some possibilities there now. But yeah. So are we squared up on structure?
So your dividing line is essentially parsed.
That's right. Right. And semi-structured is, I asked the question, what is the easiest to forget? As security professionals, like what we have seen is ServiceNow has ton of sensitive data within tickets, and no one knows about it. Your CRM systems may have ton of sensitive data. If you just scan your Salesforce, by the way, you will find sensitive data over sensitive data that no one knows about it, essentially. So it's like out of sight, out of mind. And that, I think, the main point of this slide is, A, there are different techniques to handle structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. But B, do not forget about the semi-structured data. So structured data, it's fairly straightforward. You will find many more solutions out there that will actually do a good job of discovery and classifying your sensitive data within structured data, which is good, by the way. And the problem of scale doesn't appear as much because I can actually make inference very, very quickly. You just scan a few rows, 5,000 rows, 10,000 rows, you're good, essentially. Even if the database might have 100 million rows, doesn't really matter. Unstructured is extremely hard, but if it has good metadata, i.e. file, ownership, create, access time, all of that good stuff, you can actually create, one of the biggest problems is semi-structured data. So you should, maybe as a task, bit of a homework, as you're starting to look into DSPM, look into, my teams are asking about DSPM for this, then this. Are they forgetting about semi-structured data? Are they forgetting about ticketing systems, essentially? Because it's at the end of the day, if something gets leaked, something gets exposed, you can say, well, they didn't even bring that up to my attention. It is your responsibility, unfortunately. So that's all I will say on this one. And I will walk here to go to the next slide. All right. So this is the slide I wanted to talk about. Now, there's a lot here, but there's also a kind of a question in this slide. So what we have on the slide over here is 3 maybe broad categories for organizations about their data security posture maturity. So DSPM maturity. Now, maybe, let me just describe. This is like where your organization is just starting to think about DSPM. Adoption of AI perhaps is actually driving that conversation for some of you, essentially. You're aware of the problem at least. That's the good thing about this category. You're aware of the problem. There's actually a driver why you're being forced to look into DSPM. This one here, you're a little bit ahead of the curve, essentially. You have done some research. You've probably tested a few solutions as well, right? Or you're wondering about how to operationalize it, or it's just too expensive, not part of your budget this year, right? And here, you have a solution. Amazing. You are ahead of the curve. You have a solution, you're happy with that. Or you have a solution, but you're looking for some other replacement for one reason or the other. Quick show of hands. It's not getting recorded. Only I'm getting recorded. Who do you think, who amongst you think that you are here? Just one. All right. That's great. So does that mean that everyone else is here or here? You're not even thinking about it. We should have another category. We aren't even thinking about it. How about this one? You've done some research. That's 1. All right. 2. And here. All right. So that's 2 of you here. That's great. All right. Go ahead.
Board-driven data is a rarity.
Yeah.
I mean, they simply don't get involved, unless it's regulatory.
Yeah.
When it's combined with AI, especially.
Yeah. I think AI is really what we are seeing, what I am seeing, particularly in talking to people within the community, is a number of company boards are asking their CEO and leadership about what's our AI strategy. And that is driving CEOs to ask the question, well, to the CTOs, hey, what's the AI strategy? CTOs are trying to go and find different solutions because no one knows how AI will actually change their company or their business, essentially. So they're trying a few things, but in that process, a lot of the data is getting exposed, unfortunately, right? And so to the point that you were making. So that's one of the drivers essentially, but I suspect, so I think there were like 6 people who raised their hands, 1, 2, and 2, so 5 people or 6 people. Where would you say the rest of you are? Go ahead.
So traditionally, I've been more on the sales side, just to give you an idea. But I'm going to say when you look at your starting journey, most companies still haven't actually set up out to do any form of data minimization. They're not there yet. Where they should be, regulatory requirements actually are at adoption. That's been that you've had data security mandates, at least in California, since CCPA came out. We are so far past regulatory requirement, it's not even funny, but most companies, they haven't started the journey, and the tools they're looking at are add-ons that don't really, they're not really focused. They're like, hey, this says DSPM, checkbox.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right. Yeah. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to California. Like GLBA, for example, if you're in financial services, GLBA, data retention, all of that, right? PCI, of course, right? So in some sense, there has always been some regulatory requirements to financial services and healthcare, or HIPAA, essentially. But that has been too narrow and too niche. The more interesting thing that's emerging, in my perspective, these days, is companies who are not financial services or healthcare, regular businesses who have data are being forced because of either regulatory reasons like CCPA and privacy requirements, or breaches that are happening, right? And breaches that are happening, I'll grant you that maybe your companies are not getting breached, which is amazing. Let it be so, right? But your partners might be getting breached. And because of that, your data might be getting exposed. So then how does it really help you? You have the great fortress inside of your company, but your partners are getting breached and they're exposing your data. It doesn't really help you, essentially. So a combination of these factors, basically a little bit of history, not too much of history, but because of a lot of these breaches and some of these regulations that were newer, the privacy-centered regulations, they all happened in the last 5. I mean, breaches have been happening forever, but the privacy regulations happened in the last 5 years, essentially. And that really forced, so how does this work? I mean, I'm from the Bay Area. There's a lot of VC community over there, right? That forced a lot of money to flow into this problem that was hitherto unserved, essentially, at that point in time. Point number 1. Point number 2, advent of AI, which only happened in the last 2 years with ChatGPT, everyone became, at least started thinking about AI. It has forced even more money to flow into the area of data security, essentially, because people are now asking about how do I implement AI if I don't have proper controls on data. So a little bit of a history lesson, not to bore you too much with that. All right, let's see. That worked. Now I don't know where I was. All right. So let me recap a little bit. So far, I think broadly speaking, if I have it right, we have addressed 3 topics. One is, what is the practical way of approaching a data security project? Discovery, classification, aim for that 80%. Classification is super important because you can actually figure out where you need to be super, insistent, and where you're okay, essentially. That's point number 1. Point number 2, do not forget about semi-structured data. Most of us actually do forget about it, so don't forget about that. And point number 3, where were you on that journey, essentially? Are you starting to think about it? What my experience is, if you start to think about it today, which is June of 2025, you'll probably get budget in about 12 months. That's my experience for data security. It's different from network security or firewall. You can go to your CEO and say, dude, or madam, like, if we don't get this, we don't have a business, because our entire thing will get hacked and that's it, and you will get budget right away. Not for data security, right? So data security, I've seen companies generally work on it for about 6 months, 12 months, and then it becomes part of the next year's budget, essentially. So this would be a good time to start thinking about the rest of you who didn't raise their hands. Now, let's get into the second part, which is, if you start looking at DSPM, what should you be looking at? Make sense so far? Yeah? All right, I got a thumbs up. So a lot of these things we've actually covered, but not all. Discovery and classification, we did cover that. We did discuss that. Lineage and flow mapping is very interesting. We haven't talked about that. Risk assessment, prioritization, and policy enforcement and integration. Okay, so quite a few new topics over there. First one we have covered, but not all of them essentially. All right, lineage and flow. I have a habit of speaking before the slide comes up, but I think data lineage is another topic that we all understand when it comes to structured data, actually. Who is accessing the data? Where is data going from one place to another? But it is extremely hard to do that when it comes to unstructured data, the figuring out lineage for unstructured data. The best that we have seen is, oh, we'll do file level access controls. That's not really lineage. That's not really lineage. The question of lineage is, if there is sensitive data present at a location where it shouldn't be, how did it get there? That's the question of lineage, right? That's actually, I'll just talk about a little bit about the kind of the security, on the product side. So this is not about Lightbeam, just general product. That's actually a very hard problem and it has not been solved yet. Let me just be very clear about that. So how did sensitive data get at a location where it wasn't supposed to be there? Now, for structured data, it has been solved, which is great, by the way. You can go and look into your query logs, who made the SQL query, how did the data go there, right? All of that, good stuff. Unstructured data, it's hard. Seems like you want to say something.
That's addressed at a policy level. If someone's giving away passwords or social securities or whatever in a Teams Meet chat or a Zoom meeting, they should be, there should be a policy that they're violating for doing that. 2, there should be a policy that other people should be correcting them on that. And 3, you should be logging who are the participants of the meeting.
That's fair. Yeah, nothing to, but you want to add something to that? Good. You keep saying what he said, right? I think so. Yeah. So go ahead.
When you're talking about the data lineage, what are you really referring to? Is it the business data lineage or the technical data lineage? Because we are talking about the two different universes, right?
I would say sensitive data lineage, and I would also say the business data lineage problem, because business data typically stays in structured data repositories, typically, not always. That problem is actually solved. And you do have solutions out there that will actually tell you and even restrict that and all that. But when it comes to non-business, non-unstructured data lineage, essentially, i.e., so you give an example, someone put a social security number in a Teams chat. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But let me ask you a question. A file showed up in SharePoint or in an S3 bucket, and that file didn't have sensitive data when it showed up. But a month from now, a day from now, it actually has sensitive data.
Right. If I was managing the data, there's a ZFS snapshot for any arbitrary point in time. You can see when that file was changed, when the data was added, and who did the change.
That's right. It is possible, but it's only possible if you go figure out that one file, or if you have a billion files, how do you do that?
I automate everything, so you could generate a report that says, here's what file was changed by who, here's the history of the people who changed the file, so here's the one person that changed 400 million files on this day.
Yeah. So what I would say to that, essentially, is I think what you're talking about is if there's look, everything is possible one way or the other, but I'm talking about just all the products out there that are there, all the solutions out there. If you have a billion files, you will only start that exercise when you have something that has happened, essentially. And then you can go and figure that out. You can take all the snapshots in the world that you can. And look, I come from the infrastructure background. Unfortunately, it is extremely, it's not even hard. Right now, it is almost impossible with the techniques and the tools that we have to figure out a simple thing, which is if you have a single file, you can do that. You can actually do that for one single file, or if you know what you're looking for. But go ahead. Looks like you're trying to say something.
Assuming you're doing things on a procedural basis, anything you could do for one file, you could do for any number of files. It's just a question of cost. And if you're using a file system like ZFS, which makes snapshots possible, It's open source. It doesn't cost you anything in licensing fees. There's no reason not to do that in the beginning.
How many of you use ZFS?
Who knows what ZFS is or B-tree file system?
So I think this is
so they may be using it without knowing it. IBM Flash Storage gives their own name for it. Everyone has different versions.
So I think we are approaching the problem slightly differently. When you look at any file system-based solution, it only does it, or it does it at a very, very, very large scale, which is good. I come from the storage background. I understand how snapshots work and all that good stuff. The way I'm approaching the problem, or I would imagine most of the security team approaches the problem, is not from a storage layer, but from the application layer. So people approach the problem from SharePoint, OneDrive, Slack, Teams, Salesforce. That's the approach, essentially. And there, you should keep a mic.
So just as an example, there's things like ransomware and other stuff. If your backups are done correctly, you don't care about ransomware because you can just revert back to when it was. And let me finish the second part in this. And the reason you can do that is because you will know that, hey, normally 1,000 files change a day. 100 gigabytes change a day, but in the last hour, a terabyte has changed. That should send a warning flag so you can stop it before it actually spreads anywhere and makes you need to do that. And if you architect it properly, it can all be done automatically.
Yeah, that's fair, but that's different from the point that I was making. That is not, remember, we were talking about lineage, right? And flow mapping. How is data moving inside of your organization? And what you're talking about is from an infrastructure, as I said, from an infrastructure layer, all of these solutions have existed for years. But from the application layer, it has been, you want to say something there?
So I did want to add in one thing. Now, today we've got agents being used by agents. And I will tell you right now that I've used them to create files. I've used them to scrape data from other locations, create additional files. And they can daisy chain and create mass numbers of files. Now, I've used it to create labs, and specifically to do sensitive data or to do trade secrets or things like that, to build those labs in insane rates of change.
Yeah.
But in business today, you've got people doing similar types of things. So where we used to look at things as saying, hey, I've got so much going on. I mean, I saw a company go from 0.5 terabyte to, 10 terabytes in a day to 100 terabytes in the next day. That type of growth is now slow. So we can do a lot on the back end, but it's going to have to be in multiple places. It's not.
Yeah. I think that's adds to the point that with the rate of change, it is possible, though. I do want to say that if you approach it from the infrastructure layer, it is possible, although at that rate of change, it becomes a little harder and harder.
It becomes very expensive.
Yeah. Which also something that you noted that it could become a cost concern. But if you do it from the application layer, it is basically, I mean, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of files, which is basically nuts. It's security operations guys will go nuts essentially with that and gals, right? So that's, I just wanted to kind of cover that a little bit, and we'll see if there's more to that. We can discuss that more. Now, risk assessment and prioritization. I have an example over here. I was told very quickly, very specifically by the CSA and ISACA team members, but I still kind of sneaked in this screenshot over here because I thought this was a very good way of figuring out how and where to start your data security journey. So what you're seeing over here is kind of like a risk distribution of your different data repositories, if you will. So you can plot 10, 20, 100 data repositories on a graph like this, and it has two axes. X-axis is the aggregate amount of data security risk that's actually present in that data repository, and Y-axis the risk density. So what is risk density? Let's say I've got 100 files within SharePoint, and all of those 100 files contain sensitive data. The risk density is 100%. If one file contains sensitive data and the rest of the 99 don't, the risk density is 1%. That's simple definition. I'm not trying to make it complex. I'm trying to simplify this. Now, here's the benefit. that I think all of us get. When you ask for funding and that funding gets approved 6 months later, your boss says, well, what's the impact of that funding? What happened? I gave you this budget. You did something. What happened? What's the impact? I think something like this would really help, because what you can actually do is before the start of the project, you can actually plot, you can pick up your 10 most hypersensitive, super sensitive data repositories. When I say data repositories, could be databases, could be Slack, doesn't really matter, anything. Plot them over here. That's your baseline. After your funding and after 6 months have gone and you have implemented some controls, do the same exercise, see if it has moved the needle. If it has, that's your win. That's your win for the year or for the quarter, essentially. So I felt like, even though I sneaked in, sorry, ISACA and CSA members, but I feel like it's a very practical way of approaching a problem that has not been, in some sense, solved thus far, essentially. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Yeah. Previous slide. Let me try this here. Yeah.
Data is static, right? So, but in this AI or ML age, data is not static, it's dynamic, right? So I mean, you have all the basics. Let's say you have all the basics, classification, policy, all those things but how do you, I mean, I think in my opinion, the contemporary or today's challenge, the main challenge is the access management, especially in the age of prompting and agenting, right? Because both are dynamic. With MCP and all these technologies, all these architectures in place. So that's where I think the most challenging in terms of the data security. I mean, that's not even the compliance. I mean, of course, the compliance is, for example, FDA has, kind of reinvented the data regulations and things like that for the HIPAA and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the policy enforcement, that's the key for access management, policy access management. That's the
Yeah, it's not, I think you made 2 points, by the way. One is that is it static versus dynamic, and how does the dynamic nature of sensitive data generation access gets covered over here, number one. Number two, you mentioned that should it be all be at the policy level, right? From an access standpoint. This is actually a snapshot, by the way. So if you think about it, you can't, everyone uses Teams here or Slack. How many messages get exchanged within your Teams/Slack environment every day? Thousands?
20,000.
20,000? Tens of thousands, right? Can you, as a security team, can you control who sends what kind of message to someone else? That's it. You can't, right? And that is not even the practical way that security is expected to work. Is you can't be the traffic cops. Every message comes to you. You say, "Yep, this is a good message. Let it go." Doesn't work that way, right? So what this does actually is it allows you and it enables you to measure and handle risk at a broader level, which is at a data repository, which is Slack or Teams as a one data repository, Team or whatever, OneDrive, SharePoint, Salesforce, whatever, as different data repositories, right? So to your first point, yes, it is not dynamic in that it's not changing every day. It can, but what will you do with that everyday change? The idea is that if there was a data repository over here, high risk and high risk density, over the period of time, has it actually moved down? That's your win. Remember, it's all about, there's a reason why it's called data security posture management. It's all about improving your posture. Go ahead, sir.
So looking at your matrix there, the one thing that brought to mind to me was the highest percentage of companies I've ever seen listed on any advertisement, discussions, whatnot, on being able to deprovision a user was 17% of companies think that they can. Not that they do it, that they think they can do it.
Right.
Everyone else pretty much, yeah, I think I got it all, maybe. And you have a lot of different products up there. So you need, without something as an overlay, which is really an area where DSPM can be great, you have to manage them all separately.
Which is where you need this is why you need a DSPM solution.
This is why you need a
This
DSPM.
is why you need.
Because you can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talk about protections in Slack versus Teams, they're completely different.
Yeah.
There's no like, oh, I can do this over here and I can do this over here. They're different. It's not even like two separate languages. It's two different ways of thinking.
Paradigm, yeah. In fact, just to add to your point, the way Google does labeling and Microsoft does labeling is exactly opposite. For Microsoft, label number 1 is the highest priority, and for Google, label number 1 is the lowest priority. just look this up. So this is like completely crazy. Like, how do I, or my organization, what do I train my people at? Right? Do I train them to say, well, highest priority label, if you see label number 1, that's highest or lowest? Because now it's like exactly opposite. So it's
that's based off of, so that actually goes back to an older story, which is where the NTFS permissions come from. They did the opposite of all the older operating systems, which was a bad idea. So when they came to labeling, it's based off of firewall rules.
Yeah.
Most secure is at the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Google, some of their stuff they don't really have.
I'm not here to sell you on Google or Microsoft. I don't really care, right?
I don't know.
But I think the point is more to the point that you are making is that this is why, just to bring that uniformity across your organization. By the way, the other point that you were making is each one of these tools or products have some level of security controls. That is a true statement. Snowflake has one and Google Drive has one, and it is a true statement. The problem is that they're not consistent with each other, and hence a DSPM solution generally is required. That's all, right? So hopefully hopefully you can take that home a little bit and, kind of, hopefully you can, that's useful. There is something interesting. I will skip through a lot of these things actually, because there is something that is, so this is the third part and the final part of the talk. And I want to see what the reaction is for the audience over here on this one. Data for the last 20 years, whenever we have looked at data, we have looked at data as, what data is it? Is it a social security number? Is it a credit card? Is it a patient medical record? It's just the answer, the question that we answer is what data is present there. Now the paradigm is actually changing and evolving. And we are getting to ask this question, not just what data, but whose data is actually present. So let's say there's a 9-digit number, and we are sure that that 9-digit number is a social security number. We are sure about that, right? In my hypothetical example. Traditionally, the entire industry has always focused on, okay, let's just figure out if this is a social security number or not. And if it is, great, there's a policy over here that will apply. And if it isn't, then don't worry about it. Now, with the advent of AI, because look, AI is not only just creating a problem for data security, AI is also helping data security companies. So we are all, not just Lightbeam, we're all using AI to figure something out. One of the things that we are actually figuring out is whose data is actually getting exposed. Now, question here. Let's say I, PD, and my colleague there, Eric, if I share my credit card with Eric on Teams, I know it's a room full of security professionals. They're like, don't do that. I know, I get it. But I'm an employee and Eric needed something to buy, it's fine. I mean, whether it's fine or not, but I ended up sharing it because it unblocked him. So you will probably frown at me, but you will probably not kill me. Like, you will not be mad at me. Here's the second example. That credit card that I shared was a customer credit card. Does it change the equation? I'll probably get fired. Probably he will too. So you see, in this simple example, what changed? I'm still sharing the 16-digit credit card. What has not changed? Identity has changed. Whose credit card? If PD is sharing his own credit card with Eric, yeah, I will get a slap on the wrist. I'll be given a security training. What are you doing, right? And that would be all. But if PD starts sharing customer credit card, patient credit card. That's what the heck is happening over here, right? So this is the interesting bit, actually. This is why this is, I was very excited to talk about this. This is identity behind data. Now, we all, I think, intrinsically understand it, but there haven't been solutions that actually figure out identity, traditionally speaking. Now there are solutions that actually look at data and say, oh, what data? Also, whose data? By the way, all the privacy regulations that some of you are familiar with, they don't care about what, they care about who. If Jane Doe comes to your company and says, please delete all my data, you can just say, well, I've deleted 100 addresses. Now, did you delete Jane Doe's address, right? That's the more important thing, essentially. So the data identity, there's another thing, by the way. I hope none of your companies get breached, but if your company, or let's make it easy, your partner gets breached, let's say. Today's methodology is, breach happened in this S3 bucket, and that S3 bucket had some sensitive data. We don't know whose sensitive data got breached. So let's go and send a breach notification to all of our customers. And let's offer them a free identity check and identity monitoring for a year. This is very, very typical, unfortunately. With identity, if that breach were to happen, you can actually figure out, whose data got breached? Jane Doe and John Doe. Those are the two people. So I can actually offer everything that I needed to offer to these two people. And I don't have to make a big hullabaloo about, oh my God, the whole thing got, no. I can send a breach notification to two individuals. I can offer them whatever, I can take care. So identity is actually very, very interesting. The moment you can figure out identity behind data, it makes the problem easier in unwanted scenarios like breach, essentially. So this is actually the third part, and I hope this is making sense thus far. I already talked about that. So these are some of the examples, again, hope no one has to go through a breach, but if you were to, and if you don't know identity, you don't know whose data got exposed, you have to notify everyone almost, right? Essentially, reputational damage, right? All of that, legal exposures, financial penalties. So very simple thing, whose data? If you don't know that, a lot of bad things can happen. And the contrast to that, of course, is if you, for some reason, know whose data got affected, that's actually very interesting because your exposure can be a lot lower. Let me take a quick 5 seconds break. Is this making sense? Any questions on this? Any points of discussions? Because I'm assuming this is a newer topic, I'm assuming. Yeah, I got some nods. Yeah, go ahead. That's true. Yeah. So the point over here was sometimes based on the regulatory requirements, you still have to report them. Like, for example, if patient data gets breached, HIPAA requirements and reporting and all that is there. At the end of the day, though, in the worst case, if patient data got exposed, by knowing the identity, at least you know who to take care of. Right? While you will do all your reporting, which is good, but at least okay, Jane Doe's data got breached. So let me go and take care of Jane Doe. Yeah, that's right. That's at least. Go ahead, sir.
So privacy has been a big focus of mine for many years. I'm going to say right now, looking at this, what is really neat about this is this has more of an impact in places like the US and Canada than Europe. This is a huge deal. I can't actually quantify how big a deal it's. So congratulations. That's actually that really is that big of a deal. And I, as a cybersecurity person, it's like, okay, cool. I know who was breached. As a privacy professional, which is my other side, this is not small.
Yeah. This keeps them awake at night is what you're saying.
This is the holy grail.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say it makes perfect sense. I was just curious to ask everybody how many people here had thought about it this way before this slide came up, because honestly, I hadn't.
So are you saying about the identity being the central for the data security, or what's the?
I'm saying instead of looking at what data is it asking whose data is it?
Oh, you mean the data ownership?
Not the ownership, but the data subject. Whose data?
Okay, yeah. I mean that's the ownership, right? I mean, for example, like a HIPAA data, right? Let's say it's heavily controlled by the compliance, right? You need to put controllers because of the compliance, HIPAA compliance, right? So that means you are not I mean, let's say my company is processing your data. So you are not the owner. You are being delegated. You got the delegation from the owner, who is the patient, to process the data.
That's
So
right.
to get
In that example, patient is the owner. Yeah.
patient is the owner, right? Same thing with the financial, like the account holder is the owner. Okay, and that's all the GDPR and HIPAA and all, they say that, okay, as a company, as an enterprise, you are not the owner. You need to get that's why, privacy, the consent is the number one issue in today's world, right? I mean, identify who is actually the owner and whether he has sold the data or he has not sold the data, those kind of things, right?
Correct.
I mean, that's why most of these.
So great question. Who had thought about identity or in this way? I don't know. I don't know what audience has to say to that question. Go ahead.
So thought about it, yes. I mean, 5 years ago, I wrote an article about who are you protecting, data or the person? But the idea that you have a tool that's trying to identify with, even if you had an 80 percentile success, that should lead into being a standard, because remember, all of these regulations, they're all based off reasonable security, which is always changing, and should include this capability. Flat out, should.
You should. I mean, we got CSA and ISACA members. I'm sure they can influence, right? But it's a. So hopefully this is making sense. Let me see. I also want to do. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm struggling here. When we're talking about identity, if I think about your CRM, there is a database behind it. So we're talking about quantity as well. I think a gentleman here alluded to that a little bit. When you say data breach, there is a quantity associated with it. So how having the identity piece is going to, I guess I'm struggling with what you're trying to say here. We're not talking about, when we're talking about data breach, we're talking about more than one person, right? Maybe 500 people. I think that's the CCPA.
Yeah, I think it's worth spending maybe a minute on that. Anyway, that was my last slide, so we have got maybe a few minutes to spend on that. Let's talk. Let's actually start with data ownership, which is actually, and you explained it very well. I'm going to do a different way of explaining that. Jeff, you have a file. You are literally the owner of that file. The file says this is owned by Jeff, right? That file contains PD's information. It contains PD, the name, and PD's social security number. So when we say, or when I say identity, I say whose data, we could generally say, well, that's Jeff's file. So Jeff is the owner of the data. And that's the traditional way. That's not right. You have my data in there. That's what that gentleman was saying actually there. So if that file gets exposed in a breach, you will come to Jeff and say, hey, dude, your file got exposed, but Jeff is not the one who will do the breach notification to. You will do it to me because actually my data got breached, right? So when I say, I think it's worth spending like 30 seconds on this, right? So there are different concepts. One is there's a data, like a file or an object owner, and then there's a data subject. These are privacy terms, but I'm sure some of us will be familiar with that. And data subject is actually the owner of the data. Data subject is the one who needs to give consent for that data to be shared, exposed, whatever it is essentially, right? So with that out of the way, with that out of the way, now let's go back to the breach question. So let's say my favorite example is an S3 bucket because that's where blob of data lives. But actually in your example, it was CRM. So it's in some sense, the more you move from unstructured to structured, the easier it gets, by the way, from a breach notification, right? If you tell me that a SQL server got exposed, someone had access to a SQL server, this table, I can tell you exactly whose data got exposed because it's all there in the SQL server, nicely laid out, essentially. If you tell me it's a CRM system, I would say, yeah, that's fine because CRM systems are kind of like semi-structured. So we can actually figure out whose data, which customer data might have gotten exposed. But if I tell you, hey, here, 500,000 files that got exposed. Now, how do you figure out whose data got exposed? 500,000 files, 500,000 files. How do you figure out whose data got exposed? Does that make sense? Like, the example of structured, as you move to unstructured, the problem gets harder and harder, essentially, right? And so you're right. In my example, I was saying Jane Doe's data got breached, but it won't be one individual. It would be 500,000 individuals, essentially. The problem is the moment it is unstructured, like an S3 or SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, whatever it is, and that kind of data that's getting exposed, if it happens today, I guarantee you, unless if it happens for like maybe 10 files, which you can actually manually inspect, maybe 100 files, 1,000 files you can manually inspect. But if it happens to 500,000 files, there is no way any one of us can actually manually inspect. There's no way. So then the best thing that we will do is we'll probably write some script. We'll say, well, I got these customers. Let me do a search. Search for these customers to be present in this file. The problem is that if the name doesn't appear, if my social security number is there, but my name is not there, you will completely miss me. But my social security number got exposed. So then how do you figure out whose data got exposed? I think that's where the data identity comes into picture, essentially, right? Can you figure out, given a blob of data, whose data got exposed, might have gotten exposed, using techniques? And I think, if I may, there are techniques like entity resolution and reference resolution from the field of AI, which was not present. Well, actually, technically speaking, they were present 10 years back. They were just not popular. In the last 5 years, they have become popular. So more people like me are starting to use those techniques now. These are basically transformer-based models where you throw blobs of data at the model, and the model will figure out, that's Jane Doe, that's John Doe, that's Farah, that's Pete. Like, it will figure out all of that, and it will tell you, it will give you a nice list saying, these are all the individuals whose data is actually present in this blob. Now you go and figure out how to notify them, essentially. So that's what I was referring to. Hopefully that's making sense. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Am I talking? Oh, I am talking. My career, last 20 years, is I had a business where I processed billions of pieces of data, PII, that were submitted for federal programs. And I could always tell where that data was. Absolutely. Because you wouldn't bring it into your system if it wasn't attached to an identity. There's just no way you're just going to have like a billion documents laying around and nobody has any idea who they belong to because it's not valuable anymore to the program. I would have been fired, from every program if I lost not a single document, but if I lost documents and they become decontextualized from a profile of somebody that submitted that data. That's a PII loss in itself. So I guess to your point, what are these documents? Because they're not, we know that structured data can't be lost because it's contextualized. Emails have the meta tagging to it, so you're going to know emails. And anything that's shared to SharePoint or document file system, it's going to be shared not necessarily with the identity, but why would you put it up there without an identity? It wouldn't make any sense. It's like a company would just be throwing this out the door and losing all its business value.
I think this is where the more metadata you can associate with data, the more it gets closer to becoming semi-structured to structured, which is good. Like, if you have a lot of metadata, then it's kind of like getting into that structured to semi-structured, which is good. But I don't know, like, if you've heard of the Vegas, one of my colleagues is from Vegas, massive breach there, right, at a large casino. And it was all files. no one, actually, it's actually, I don't want to say never, but it's actually very rare that someone's structured data gets exposed or breached. Very rare. Like, I don't know, maybe it has happened. I don't know of an example where someone's SQL server or Oracle got exposed. Internally, it happens all the time. Someone got access to it that shouldn't have all of that. But it is rarer. What generally happens is this data that you never think about, shadow data, that someone gets access to your network, privilege escalation, goes after the files, gets into all the details, and that's what gets exposed essentially. So go ahead, sir.
So we tend to think about it because we're a lot of technical people here, that it's going to be on file shares, it's going to be in different systems. Something that I've ran across, because I've been doing a lot with companies trying to get them to just organize records. Today, paper records that get scanned in to somebody's desktop when they need them is still a normal thing. My last large-scale records management project, the reason it was actually happening was literally black mold. So
I'm personally aware of large casinos in Vegas and large insurance providers actually in the US and Canada region where everything, not everything, but a lot of things is still paper records actually. And there are teams of people, like armies of people who actually scan that and then use Adobe to actually manually redact sensitive content and then file it somewhere else. It's like, just, it's just like, there you go. Yeah. Right. So I think that gives you chat at the back. I think the audience is giving us all examples of, right? Like, how all of this sensitive data could creep into unstructured data.
That's not value is very less, maybe like what for that guy for like one part of the something like that. Right? But project security company, yeah, very good. Even though your name is not there as a part of the file, the value is very less because he has to do a lot of work in order to find who is the what's the name of what they do, and where he must be there. Yeah, so again, like almost a common to become a very common 500 million records and everything. I mean, one way or the other, but they are not like a very highly highly
Exactly. Again, hopefully you've seen a theme. My job here is not to make the problem too big that we can't solve it. My job really is to simplify and say, well, let's just go. So you're right. And I think this is where discovery and classification and labeling is really important, because you can actually classify and label maybe 1% of your super sensitive data appropriately and then do access controls and policies on that. You already won a lot of the battle, right? And then it's what I was showing earlier, which is to say, start with the topmost data repositories that have highest risk and highest risk density, bring that down over a 6-minute period. You're like ahead of the pack, right? So I think all right, I think we are pretty much done, I think. Let's see. Yeah, as I said, so just kind of like this is a summary. Look, data security posture management is a newer kind of initiative slash exercise. Again, not for everyone. I think you've been doing that for some time. It's great. But for most of us, budgets are not there, broadly speaking. All breaches happen, they're not after a network IP address, they're after your data. Data is what they're after, right? And it's kind of like we put the firewall, which is great. We put all the network policies, which is great. Now we are finally getting to, we got the configurations right, which is also good. Now we're getting to, where do we have the data? Everyone is after the data. So figure out where your sensitive data is, start with discovery and classification, aim for 80%, you'll be great. Do use hopefully the risk score, the risk matrix that we talked about. And last but not least, think about identity behind the data. If you can start thinking about identity behind the data, data identity behind the data, right? If you can start thinking about identity behind the data, I think that itself puts you ahead of the curve, essentially. So with that, I hope this was useful, and I appreciate y'all's patience and the spirited participation. Did you want to say something, sir?
Yeah, just to tie back into the 80%, you can think of all the data and the records the same way you would if you're dealing with a literal database pipeline. If you're getting data from a customer and you're scanning paper documents into the desktop, the policy shouldn't be to scan it to your desktop. It should be to scan it to folder 439 for client 439 in the folder, so that you can maintain everything in as procedural and automated a fashion as possible, which makes it easier to tie it to whomever it's supposed to be. And you can then redact it from that point and then provide the redacted version to people who aren't supposed to have access to the unredacted versions.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. All right. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So I actually just heard a story about like a month ago where a company got breached right after they put like a decade's worth of paper documents like up into their system. And so their breach was much larger because they could have just had all that stuff in a box. It's like just bad timing. But one of the other tie-ins, I thought very interesting, like how we look psychologically, like a delineation between like OPM breach or something else, like where it's like, oh yeah, I get my data identity behind that breach, but on a personal level. But then I always like think of identity as like the insider threat or non-human identities, and like I'm thinking about that more so with like AI and all these API calls and everything right now. That that's kind of where my head goes. So this is a very interesting shift.
It's don't forget them, but this is an add-on to that, essentially, right? Appreciate it.